me. I think here's the button, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're ready to get started. Sorry about all these technical issues. It's just we're in a very weird room setup, but we're very happy to have all of you here. I think we also have a good amount of Zoom participants right now. So today we're going to be talking about two very special topics, alternative proteins and machine learning and AI approaches. So over the last few years, certainly machine learning has made a big splash. Machine learning and AI are certainly not new technologies, but we've seen the explosion of deep learning models, transformer models, large language models, generative AI, and protein prediction models. And many are wondering, how is this going to affect the alternative protein industry? So today I'm very happy to be joined by Cai Linton from Multus. Multus is a biotechnology company based in London, focused on developing sustainable animal-free growth media for cell culture, particularly for the use of cultivated meat and broader life science industries. I'm also joined by Zoe from New Wave Biotech. New Wave Biotech is also a London-based startup founded in 2022, which specializes in AI-driven bioprocess simulation and software. They hope to revolutionize the biomanufacturing industry, particularly for synthetic biology and alternative protein sectors, by making R&D faster, cheaper, and more sustainable. I am also joined by machine learning engineer Itsi Weinstock. Itsi was previously affiliated with Climax Foods, which is a biotechnology and food innovation company headquartered in Berkeley, California. Company leverages the data science and artificial intelligence to accelerate the development of plant-based foods, starting with dairy alternatives. So we have all the three alternative protein sectors represented very well. And I think we are just ready to get started. So I'm just going to kick off the panel. You are welcome to jump in at any moment, all of our three panelists. We hope to hear from all of you, but if you also feel that a question has been well answered by the other panelists, we're happy to move on to another question. We'll just leave it up to you. This is supposed to be a very organic, non-scripted conversation. So I'm just going to kick off with a very general question, which is, what specific problems are you using machine learning to solve in your company's approach to alternative proteins? And what made those approaches particularly suitable for machine learning solutions? What is the motivation behind that? Anyone want to get started?
I can begin, perhaps. So, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. How is that? Good. All right. So, yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Alessa, for organizing this and hosting me in this panel. At Multus, as you mentioned, we focus on improving the design of cell culture media for biomanufacturing and, in particular, cultivated meat. Part of that problem, we break it down into two key decisions. First, we need to select the right set of nutrients to target this specific cell, and then given the objectives about how we want those cells to grow, we need to find the right concentrations and combinations of those nutrients. And so those are the two critical questions that we're trying to answer, and using AI to improve that decision-making process. And the way that we use AI, or why AI is particularly suited to that kind of problem, is because we're dealing with high dimensionality and complexity. There are many possible ingredients that we could feed cells, from the amino acids to vitamins and minerals and salts and sugars and cytokines and different carrier proteins. So we start with actually quite a large ingredient library, 100 plus ingredients that could possibly be useful to feeding cells. And we need to find how those ingredients affect specific cell functionality and perhaps interact with each other to have positive or negative effects. And from that, we need to narrow down the selection so that we have the minimal number of ingredients, but no less, to drive that cell behavior in the desired direction. And the challenge with biology is that it's a black box machine. Each cell is different, and we can only read certain types of behavior. We just don't have the scientific understanding to mechanistically be able to link all of these ingredients together and join that to how cells are behaving. And so we use machine learning to analyze complex data sets and help us design experiments that effectively allow us to search through this combinatorial solution space of different ingredients that we use in media optimization.
Thank you, Kai. Could you maybe just emphasize a little bit on what specific cell types you're focusing on at Multus?
Yeah, so we developed some off-the-shelf products. So we launched one in December for bovine cells. We're working on one now for porcine cells, but then we also work in custom media development projects. So we have some at the moment on um, muscle cells, fibroblasts, fish, pig, um, as well as some in the life sciences as well, which are more kind of traditional human stem cells or hex cells for vaccine manufacturing, for example.
Thank you. Anyone care to respond next?
Sure, I can go. Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Wave Biotech. We develop AI bioprocess simulation software to essentially help solve the scaling problem that's across the alt protein industry, across novel ingredients, because at the moment, it's not just in alt proteins, but also across biomanufacturing in general. 90% of technologies actually don't manage to scale to market. And a big issue of that is because actually R&D is really slow and expensive. And also bioprocess design is actually really complex. So for any given process, you can have over 1 trillion potential combinations, which is absolutely nuts, right? And then if you think about how every experiment costs $10,000 to $100,000 per experiment, you know, you're talking about a lot of money to find out about something that's really complex, as Kai also mentioned. And like the other thing is, you know, it's not just about your technical yield or purity. It's, you know, it's also because everything from your media to your upstream process, your downstream process, your strain, everything kind of, and also where you decide to produce, right? If you want to produce in the US or different parts of US, to like say if you want to go to India or like Europe and produce, it's very, very different. And so, but if you want to understand the cost of techno-economics are about $20,000 to $40,000 per report, and life cycle analysis is 30 to 50,000 per report. But and so, what our system does essentially is that you can input any given process and like setup, and then it could predict the yield, the yield, the purity, the cost, but also the sustainability of a given process. And actually, if you set a specific target, so I'm trying to target a specific protein with a certain purity, then the system can also test through thousands or millions of potential processes and then recommend the best for you. And then as experimental data is added to the system, then the system will learn from that and improve the predictions, and from there improve the optimization. So then actually it helps you continuously optimize that project. But also as you gather more data in the system, then you train your custom model. So every single new R&D project actually benefits from your past project. So then it also helps you build your competitive advantage over time. So that's what we do. In terms of like why this is suited to AI application, I think I want to first say that it's kind of slightly cheating because we're not a pure AI machine learning model. We're actually a hybrid model that combines AI machine learning with mechanistic models. So mechanistic models are scientific formula based. So that way, essentially, you can actually model things without any data, like I guess like you know experimental data, and it would work like your traditional softwares to predict the output. But then once you add an experimental data, then it switches out assumptions. So that way there's still explainability, which obviously is really important for science, but also that also enables us to calculate things like costs and energy and things like that. The reason why AI is a really key element in this is because, first of all, there's lots of things within each processing phenomenon that's really, really hard to just model in a traditional way. So for example, if we talk about, say, filtration, so I guess like everyone kind of knows what filters work, you know, if you drink coffee. But the thing is with that, like things like say how membrane fouling, so like how the build out of dirt and things actually affect performance, your cost, everything like that is actually notoriously hard to predict. So things like machine learning is really helpful, but also particularly with biological organisms because they're living, right? So every single there's a natural variation within the batches in the different areas. So that also means that by using machine learning, we can really capture the nuance within those kind of relationships that you can't really quite capture without machine learning. So that's why we use it. Sorry, bit of a long one.
Thank you. So can we maybe move on to Itsi?
Sure. Hi everyone. Thanks, Alessa, for organizing this. Yeah, so we were focusing on machine learning applications in the plant-based area. So when you think about the things we want to do there, I kind of break it into two parts. One is you want to make a product, you want to make a plant-based product, and you want to search for various plant-based ingredients that express certain functionalities that you're interested in. And there's like, what, 80% of the Earth's biomass is plants. There's, hundreds of thousands of different species. The idea was, instead of looking for something like casein, which we know has some properties, we look for plant-based proteins that exhibit the same properties rather than doing, say, the precision fermentation approach. So that's one part of it, which honestly we didn't get that much traction with. I think that's a really interesting project. I think more people should go for that. It might not be a machine learning problem. It might just be a high throughput problem. I guess more research needs to be done in that area. The other part of it is, and while we were doing this in plant-based, the same would be applied to whether you use cultivated or precision fermentation or anything, is like, once you have all of the ingredients that you care about, how do you put them together into a good product? And really, this is it sounds somewhat similar to what Cai Multus is doing. It's a combinatorial problem where you have all these different inputs into a system and you want to make a good product. And what it turns out to be is that we can understand individual ingredients really well. Say that's different starches or proteins or fats. You can characterize them really well. But as soon as you start putting them together, and these are like pretty complex systems, like 10 plus ingredients and process parameters, things can get pretty wacky. As soon as you do that, you lose your mechanistic understanding. And so there doesn't really exist any like formulation data sets out there. And you end up having to do this kind of thing from scratch. We were using a Bayesian optimization approach, which I think it sounds like the theme of this talk is there's a lot of applications for experimental design. And this is an approach to doing experimental design where you focus on low data approaches. And I think the whole field of hyperparameter optimization for machine learning is very applicable here. And so we were using this to develop a few products. The main one I was working on was, I don't know if people have tried the plant-based Baby Bell. They were looking to reformulate and include protein. And the interesting thing there is, with working with these companies, they have existing factory lines, and you want to understand what's necessary for these factory lines, such as like viscosity or firmness constraints. And once you have those, you can actually have those constraints into your optimization. So the framework we kind of use is find your target animal product, characterize it using various sensory or mechanical properties that you can measure. And then every time you make a prototype, do those same measurements, and then you can create some sort of distance metric and converge over time as you make these prototypes. And so you can fit into a optimization framework. Yeah, that was our main application. Very black box.
All right, thank you very much. I think some of you already touched upon this, but we're all wondering the same question: where does the data come from? What data sets are you using for your training data? Obviously, biology is notorious in like most areas for being very like data scarce, or at least the data is not in a very suitable format for machine learning training. So what is it that you do? How do you face the challenge of limited data sets or not very nice data sets?
I guess I'll start because it links on with mine. I don't think formulation data sets exist. I question the quality of data at a lot of places. I think making it, for this specific approach, making it in-house was really the only way to go, and the only way you actually create models for the system that you're working with.
Can I follow up with that, Itzi? How large would you say your data was for like in-house creation of those?
It doesn't have to be that big. I think the advantage of using something like Gaussian process models, even over 10 to 20 parameters, is you only need 100 data
Okay.
sets, 100 data points. And so we would get to between like 100 and 200. That's a lot of work that goes into it. It's very expensive to do these experiments, make a prototype and measure, but yeah.
I can echo what Itsi was saying there. In the cell culture space, there aren't reliable data sets, and I think Alessa, you made a good point. It's the data quantity and data quality that's lacking in biology. A lot of manual experiments create data, but that data doesn't get stored or structured in a way that's suitable for machine learning. It might be in a lab notebook where you've either, that's the worst. You can maybe take a picture ultimately and put it into an LLM, but to train these optimization models, you need quantitative data. A lot of biology is also on feeling. You look at the shape of the cell and say, are the cells happy or not today? That doesn't work so well in optimization. We need quantitative data, and we need the quality to be sufficient to train these models, because biology is noisy, and when you have too much noise in a system, it's hard to, again, optimize so many parameters at the same time. And so what we do at Multus is replace a lot of that manual experimentation with robotic automation that allows us to be a lot more precise and consistent in our data capture. And then we use different data analysis tools to quantify a lot of those outputs. So turning a morphological assessment into a quantitative measure of morphological health. We do a lot of work with computer vision models to kind of score how these cells are growing and behaving. For us, we also use Bayesian approaches. I think that the flavor of optimization we're trying to do is not typical Bayesian optimization, because we want to try and massively reduce the time and cost of optimizing these formulations. We run it as a service. Typically, companies might take 2 to 4 years to develop a formulation using conventional approaches, and we want to bring that down to 6 months or less. And so that means we can only run three to 5 experiments per project. And so we've built the automation that allows us to capture or run hundreds to thousands of different formulations in parallel, capturing how the cells behave, and then use that in an iterative process over the course of 3 to 5 experiments. So that's a kind of slightly different flavor of Bayesian optimization in our case, but still the data sets are relatively small in the low thousands of data points. Over time, I think those decisions on ingredient selection and concentration selection only get more effective the more data you have. We can start then learning from past experiments and projects to say, okay, the cow muscle cells behaved in this way. Maybe the pig muscle cells will behave somewhat similarly. So we can actually inform the priors of our Bayesian optimization models to be even more effective in those initial experiments, and then fine-tuning with the data specific to that cell.
I think when we first started our company, actually, we thought, okay, maybe we take a more kind of like more pure machine learning approach to the work, and actually very quickly we realized that the data availability just wasn't there, particularly because we focus more on downstream processing, and really what we care about is a lot to do with the end-to-end bioprocess. So it's not just like what comes out of the bioreactor, but also the different steps that get you to your product, right? And so actually too, and if you think about each step, there, it's about the combinations and not just the parameters in one step. So to actually get enough data for that would be really quite quite impossible, even when you talk to quite large organizations. And so that's why we pivoted to a hybrid approach. So with our approach, what that means is we have quite a lot of assumptions, actually a bit like what Cai said, on like, if you haven't worked with something, but then you have something that you use in, that you kind of sub in at the beginning until you have the data. So then, and then like, so the machine learns over time. So with how, and then I think the other thing is, with our customers, we learned quite early on that there is also a certain stage where we can really start working with our customers properly. I mean, we can start predicting anything whenever, right? If we don't have minimum data, but actually if we want to do optimization, then, you know, if you're working with a shake flask, then there's only so much data you gather. And if we're talking about like time series data, then you need a machine, even if it doesn't need to be very big, you know, it could still be quite small. But it's about what data is gathered. So the way that we do this is for each unit operation, there tends to be quite standard data points that are collected no matter what brand, you know, of equipment you're using. And then we do that, and then through our hybrid approach, that's kind of how we deal with this issue. So with this, for example, we previously collaborated with Multus to help them optimize their downstream process, which is a great project. And with that, we ran 4 rounds of experimentation. We only used 8 data sets, and we helped them optimize their DSP to reduce their cost by 55%. So that's something that that was really, really great. And also thanks for, you know, taking a chance on us, because when you guys when we first talked about this, like, we were so untested. So yeah, yeah. So I think, like, there are approaches that you can take, but it's, you know, it's a lot about figuring out what is there rather than trying to run algorithms on data that doesn't exist.
I think the hybrid approach is such a great way to go. And I mean, even with the stuff we're doing in plant-based, having room for those mechanistic models would really help things. And to something Cai was saying, that there is kind of this idea that if we were going to put, like, all these scientists around the world are putting all their information in notebooks in fairly unstructured ways, and potentially, and as far as I know, people haven't really looked at doing this yet. But if we were able to gather this data or have some sort of centralizing forcing function for people to put even these scraps of notebooks and stuff into a centralized place, that could really be used not to have clean data that we put into these optimizations or models or whatever, but to maybe give us a better way of creating priors for these hybrid models, where we could have some sort of mechanistic understanding for how things work and use that as part of our optimizations. Or even with say, parameter selection. For a lot of optimizations, you have to start with say a narrower range of inputs that you want to optimize over, and to select those, that's I think somewhere where that kind of data could be quite useful.
Okay, I'm gonna follow up with a question that I think many people like to ask in biology. I think you already hinted at the fact that this might not be the case for you, but I'm gonna ask it anyway because I think it's gonna come up in the Q&A as well, which is there any opportunity, like, in like all the different pipelines that you use or different processes that you optimize, to maybe use synthetic data in some way? Because I think you hinted at what types of models you use and the approaches, but people are still excited about the prospect of using like very deep learning here. Yeah.
I think you could. We need to select perhaps a few model cell types, and I think we could create an initial data set to capture the types of responses and that we get from cells, and then from that actually kind of extrapolate, fill in the gaps, and extend a little bit. I think that certainly could be possible in some basic cell models, and then over time we could build that out. I want to run a project at some point where we do kind of create that initial data set and can use that to our synthetic data development and or optimization model development, or even image analysis model development, because we can create a 10,000 data point data set reasonably easy with our system, just kind of random screening over a few iterations. And then I think the research community could do a lot with that, but we're constrained by kind of time and capacity right now. But I think that there's definitely room for that in biology. Maybe at the very early stages of something like cultivated meat, there isn't enough convergence in some of these technologies. You know, every company has their own different cell type. If you look to say the biopharma industry, where CHO cells and HEK cells are used very routinely, there are starting to arise mechanistic models of the metabolism of those cells, because they've been studied for 30-40 years. I think in the cultivated meat industry, as the industry matures, as common cell types emerge where you say 80% of companies growing chicken cells at scale are using one cell type or some variant of that one cell type, then we could get to a point where the mechanistic models can come into cell behavior, and therefore synthetic data sets could be created around say media optimization or genetic engineering, or maybe even bioprocess engineering. Although I'd say I echo what Zoe was saying on the project we did together, which was really fantastic to use that hybrid approach on a bioprocess, a downstream bioprocess, which we were using to purify some growth factors that we were manufacturing. And where kind of the bioprocessing benefits is through a lot of, I guess, chemical engineering, which again, as an engineering discipline, has modeled a lot of the physical interactions of filters and pipes and pumps to understand mechanistically what's actually happening. So I think that there's an opportunity by looking through kind of an engineering lens, what it would take to create the right kind of data to get enough understanding to inform synthetic data sets or mechanistic models.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways I can think of this working. One is like, yeah, the technical part of using synthetic data. Because a lot of what we're doing here is using in low data regimes because data doesn't exist, and with a Bayesian flavor. So that creates room for us to be able to have synthetic data that maybe isn't the most representative, and use that as priors into our systems. And maybe that's a good way to learn between these different kinds of projects. On the other side of that, I would say like one really hard thing about working in this industry, and something that's often frustrating, is the degree to which a lot of companies here want to protect data and protect IP. A lot of what we do here is consult with other companies and trying to improve their processes. Of course, if we want to push Alt protein forward, we want to be more centralized, but we have difficulty in doing that. Companies don't want to relinquish their data. So maybe there's a world where, in working with one partner, we don't take the data, but we are able to create simulated representations of that data. I know this is like simulated data is very useful, for instance, in healthcare, where data has to be anonymized before it can be passed off into various systems. And synthetic data is a way to solve it there, and potentially it could be a way to solve things here. And that way we can work with not the data sets, but it's something that is representative of those data sets.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Itsi and Cai said as well. I think it's synthetic data is a really interesting approach. It's something that we've talked about a lot as well. But I think ultimately the way that we approach it is more kind of like, okay, of the things, if we want to predict something well, right? So therefore, what things can we, what are the components that makes this a good prediction? What are the things that influences this? And now if we step back from that, which things do we already, have lots of data on? Which things we can actually get, from predictions from, like, say, mechanistic models well, which things we can already get with customer data, and then where are the gaps, and then we kind of go from there. And I think and so for us, for example, if there's issues with, like, say, a process, maybe it's because the protein that we're talking about has a very unusual protein structure, for example, or maybe it has a really high viscosity. So then actually, do we want to just do better models for that? And actually working closely with clients to actually understand what data they actually have, I think is really important. And also some of this data, like, say, property data of all these different things are in open libraries. And those are things that we can actually use more openly. But when it comes to, like, data that comes from experiments directly, I think, like, similar to Itsi, when we first started, we kind of thought, oh, it'd be really good to be able to have some kind of, like, shared learning to move the sector forward. And with that, and obviously we emphasize a lot of things like, making sure that we have a base, you know, at least a large enough amount of data. Make sure you can't do any kind of like try and kind of backwards engineer things, and like quite a lot of security kind of related ways, and maybe like not using the data for a certain number of years, things like that. But actually, even with that, I think like and very understandably, like customers are very unsure about that approach. And actually that it's not really, at least like from the conversations we've had, like overall we don't think it's actually very viable. And I can understand why, and I think also from our point of view, because we often talk to different customers that are, you know, our competitors, right? So we also don't want to get sued. So I think, and from that point of view, like that's kind of why, like at the moment like I think that cross learning piece is just like not there, and I think like yeah, and so I think like the synthetic data piece I think could be really interesting, but I think like what we really need to figure out is actually how accurate it is, um, and like, you know, how effective it really is in answering what we need to find out.
Okay, thank you. I think you already hinted at this, Itzi and Zoe. I was gonna ask this question later, but I want to ask it now. I always love asking alternative protein companies what is their approach to like intellectual property. So a lot of them will favor patents, some of them will favor trade secrets. But with your company, since they are computational in nature, I am really confused about how your intellectual property landscape looks like. So I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, this is something that's really annoying for me. Like I don't think it's really helpful when all these different companies have an arms race to do with like patenting and that kind of stuff. I think we're still so early in alt protein and nothing has really won yet. And so it would be much better if we we're just putting things out there. Of course, that's not how things work. What I saw in the plant-based space as well was really an emphasis on patenting. And you know, there's just so many patents that companies put out there. I know that there's a few companies that work in using machine learning, specifically various flavors of optimization for formulation. Climax was doing things. There's a company, Notco, based in Chile. There's a company called Turing that does more. It's not just alt protein. They do various formulation as consulting with software. And all these players are just trying to put a lot of patents out there to I think a lot of the way this works is just being venture-backed startups, which all of these are. There's just this race to get as many patents as you can and just like hold things over one another. It's the extent to which these patents are really enforced is I question. But I think the fact of the matter is, especially on a lot of things we're still trying to do, there's nothing super patentable. This is really an execution game. When we talk about things like Bayesian optimization, even if it's various flavors of it, this technology has been around for a long time. I mean, it deals with low data optimization. I mean, this goes back to, you know, mining projects decades ago. And really, this is about building the data sets and optimizing towards and applying it into the field that we care about. And I feel that the moat that companies will have surrounding this will be for those data sets rather than the technology or the models themselves.
I can maybe add on that. I agree that the models themselves aren't inherently patentable or protectable. They're evolving all the time. There is, I think, value in proprietary data sets, although again, not necessarily patentable, but keeping them proprietary because the data quality and quantity is so scarce in biology. And so that's where I think lots of companies try to build a moat around the data that they've collected. That's often needs to be reinforced by a system of generating that data, which is kind of they go hand in hand. Just having a large data set on its own, I think is not enough. In terms of IP, for us, for example, you know, we generate thousands and thousands of formulations. We see it a bit like baking a cake. Either the recipe is so generic that if you want to focus on a specific application, you're going to change the recipe anyway. and so that's going to be out of scope. Or you go so specific on the recipe for this application that every other company is going to have a slightly different application anyway, and so it's also going to be out of scope. So we don't see much value in patenting specific formulations because either too generic or way too specific. Where we have seen in other industries, for example, in the animal feed space, there is often a focus on a proprietary set of ingredients as well that maybe have unique functionalities, or you have unique access to their supply, and that again can be some source of competitive advantage and IP advantage. Although again, mostly in know-how and maybe agreements, access agreements, than patenting something inherently, because we've seen, say, on some plant-derived ingredient, one supplier versus another is different. One slightly different processing step creates a very different ingredient, and so protecting generically an ingredient again is not that valuable.
I think so for us, because we don't have any in-house processes, whatever is created on our platform is our customers. So for us, it's just we are purely, a software platform provider. And so with that, we do have a patent pending for our methodology and application of technology, but there is quite a lot of complications there, particularly on you don't want to have a patent so anyone who reads it can just go and do it, right? But then it also needs to be specific enough to actually mean something. So I feel like the whole IP patent landscape is incredibly complicated in terms of I think you really need to figure out what are you really trying to do? I mean, the first time I really thought about patenting was, when we were fundraising, to be honest. Where it's okay, how investors want to know that there is something special about what you're developing, and it's not like they can just put a bunch of chemistry textbooks into ChatGPT and then I'll make something out for them, stuff like that. And then we've also, and then I think a lot of the moats as such with this is really about as much about your technology. So the evolution, say what Cai said about, you're just constantly changing your models. You can ask me what our model approach is now, but the reality is in a couple months' time, probably would have changed a lot. And so I think obviously there are core things that don't change, but there's I think being able to iterate quickly on that. And then I think the other thing is really about really to go to market. So actually, who are you working with? How are you getting that data? And then how do you build yourself up to a point where you become more as a standard tool that people can trust? I think that's a really difficult one, especially as a startup. How do you, we can say that we're the best tool in the world, but actually, who, why would you trust me, right? You have no reason to trust me. So then from there, actually, but then it's not like you can just go up to any large corporate or, industry expert and then just go use this, even if you give it away for free. Because, if they fail a bunch of experiments, that's still really expensive, based on your software. So then I think the way I see it is actually IP is, and building a moat isn't just about the technical side. It actually is across the whole business strategy.
Okay, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. I'm gonna ask about talent recruiting and how do you form your teams. I know we're all very varied here. Zoe's company is purely software based, whereas some of you have actual scientists doing in-house experiments. So I'm just curious about that. How do you hire the scientists that are gonna be doing the experimental work? There's already a lack of talent there in that a lot of them, of course, don't specialize in all proteins. And then there's also the machine learning engineers. How do you recruit machine learning engineers who will be able to adapt to this type of setting, which is very specific? Yeah.
could talk a bit about the team we have now. For the R&D team, it's probably 3/4 cell biologists, wet lab based, and then a quarter engineers that are working on different models or kind of lab automation equipment. So in that sense, what we look for are the wet lab scientists that can learn about data-driven biological experimental design, because it's very different when you go from an environment where you design an experiment kind of yourself and you run that maybe manually. You can test one plate at a time, so maybe you're testing for 10 different things. It's very different where suddenly you can run 50 plates at a time and test 100 different hypotheses at the same time. So we look for cell biologists that can think like a data scientist, and then data scientists that can understand the cell biology. Mostly in our engineering team, we've hired people that are, say, like data science first and learn the biology, rather than a biologist that's gone into data science. We probably choose to have that person on the cell biology team.
I think it's quite similar for us. So we have a mix of engineers, so like bioprocess engineers and software developers. And I think one of the things a few things that we really recruit for. One is, I think the interest in working in a multidisciplinary team and really curious about like actually wanting to know what's happening on the other side of the room. And I think that's really, really important, and like collaboration, because ultimately these two are very, very different disciplines. And so you're gonna disagree at some point on an approach on how to model something, right? And so being able to talk it out in a kind of very factual, what is the best way of solving a problem together way is super important. We found that, for example, like for bioprocess engineers, because we have no wet lab, so well, it means that like having a job in our team is really good for people who love bioprocessing but don't want to go back to the lab at 3 in the morning and feed a microbe. But at the same time, like, if you really like the lab work, then this is not going to be the best place for you. And so I think like we try and make it very clear in our job descriptions and how we talk about what we do, to give people a taste in the sense of what the life would be like. Because even if, like, say we recruit someone, they're technically really good, but they actually hate their job, then they're gonna leave, and that's not gonna be great for us either. So I think there's that side, and then with all the software developers, we also like we don't ask them to have an engineering degree, but we do make it clear that they need to have some interest in this, so they are willing to learn about this, and it is a scientific software, so it's going to be quite different from, like, say, if you're interested in building like a consumer software, right? So just like stuff like that. And we recruit a lot through, we always have like a technical task, and the task is a kind of mini version of something that you might do in the future on the job. So that also gives people a sense of, I guess, what the job is like. We treat this as like a two-way interview. So it's kind of as much of, are you sure you want to work here? As well as are you the right fit for us? Kind of thing.
Yeah, I haven't recruited so many people, but I have worked with a lot and kind of have ideas about what would and would not be successful on both sides of this. Like on the machine learning side, I mean, it's hard. There's not a lot of pressure for people doing computer science or data science or statistics degrees to go into this field. There's not a huge amount of money in it. There's, not much VC funding coming into the area, so there's not like this pressure like you're getting into the tech and AI fields, which is a little bit of a shame. So the people that enter this field tend to do it for the love of it, which is good. You get very passionate people coming to work in this space. I would say that when selecting on the machine learning side, in many ways, what I think it means to be a good data scientist is not just understanding how models work, but being able to enter any field, learn about it, know what open questions there are, and then direct research that has been done and apply it to that field. And so when selecting for people in data science, any pointers to that kind of skill set is very useful. As I was saying, like this is very different to consumer software. I mean, real world science is so much messy and more difficult than pure software, and for people to be able to adapt to that is very useful. On the R&D science and food end, I've worked with a variety of people there. Some look at these new approaches and approach it with gusto. Others are much more conservative about it. And I think there's a balance to be had, especially working in food. You want that conservatism, you want that institutional knowledge going into things to say, hey, maybe don't do that. But yeah, there's a lot of you need people who are open to viewing things in that kind of data science way to really push ahead with this. For a lot of these problems, as I was saying, it's not like, for instance, Bayesian optimization has been technically solved for a long time. Really, what we're doing here is organizational change and having people uptake these technologies that have already been applied to a lot of other fields. So what we want is food scientists or R&D researchers that can adapt to this. And I found that can be somewhat tricky, especially a lot of scientists work in the domain of thinking like hypothesis testing is science. And to move away from that into other kind of paradigms like prediction or optimization, these kind of paradigms for doing things can be a bit of a shift. But yeah, I think when looking for people, you want to be met with enthusiasm, and then that's the biggest predictor that things will go well.
All right, thank you. I think I'm just gonna
Yes,
ask a
Linton.
last quick question, and then maybe we can move on to audience questions. So this is just very broad, as a conclusion. What are your thoughts on the current state of the alternative protein field? I know this is very broad, so maybe you can limit it to your own section. So like maybe someone from culture, fermentation, plant-based, and also just general thoughts on like where is this machine learning approach heading towards? Do you see more companies adopting these approaches, or is it still very niche and early stage?
I could speak a bit to the cultivated meat space. I think clearly when we look back in this field, it's about 10 years old. What's been achieved is pretty extraordinary. With relatively little amount of funding, there are several companies now that have new technologies developed through a new regulatory process and products on the market in food. That's pretty amazing. I think where things have gone slightly wrong is mostly around fundraising. A lot of investors got very excited about the space with high expectations, and then as the availability of money and VC pulled back, a lot of those generalist investors that were looking at cultivated meat got a bit scared. And we have to recognize this is new technology that's coming to kind of coming to market in the food industry, which is very large, and we need to industrialize new technology and bring it to consumers. That takes a long time. Even if you look at electric vehicles or solar panels and renewable energy, that's a multi-decade process. And so I think we've made amazing progress. Arguably, the industry now technologically is, well, not arguably, definitely is stronger than it's ever been before. There's a much larger academic base. The speed at which new companies are developing the right kinds of technologies to move quick and get kind of key product milestones achieved and get closer to market. That timeline is shortening and shortening every year. I think just there's now a challenge with getting on board the right investors that have the right time horizon for this kind of technology, and companies that need to focus more on the right things that will drive their product closer to market and kind of validating the consumer reception of this technology. I think with a lot of money, that distracts you. You tend to plan for many, many things in the future all at the same time. You're going to build your scale-up facility whilst developing 20 product lines, and you're going to try and launch in the US and Europe and Asia all at once. But I think as the money's being pulled back, companies are going, okay, no, we're just going to scale this one product in this existing pilot facility we have, and we're just going after this one market. That's, yes, a kind of a more principled approach to developing cultivated meat products and bringing it to market, but I think it will mean that we learn the right lessons in the right order, and ultimately there'll be those few companies that do get it right and will be very successful in the near term.
I think I'll echo Cai that I think the overall funding environment has changed a lot in the last few years. You know, if you look at maybe like 2-3 years ago, generally, you know, a lot of times people are thinking, okay, I'm just gonna, you know, scale up my process and then I'll look at commercialization. You know, I think like today when you look at investors, you can actually really see that they look for like proper signs of traction really early on, like offtake agreements, things like that, rather than LOIs, things like that. And also, I think like I can also see that a lot of companies in the precision fermentation space has gone from going, okay, we're gonna do like a mass food product, to going, okay, we're actually gonna do like a niche product, maybe look at even like say nutraceutical or cosmetic approaches where we can actually charge more and do things at a smaller scale and commercialize first there and then scale up from there. Especially because regulatory is also much easier. And so there's like quite a lot of, I guess, like because of the higher interest rates and like the pulling back of investment, we can see that like even though I think precision fermentation hasn't had the same downturn as cultivated meat in general in investment, you can see that investment has been going to much more later stage companies, and people are much more reluctant to invest in early stage companies. So I think with that, I think there's that pressure. But also at the same time, you know, I think there's also a lot more infrastructure built now for like testing pilots, things like that. If you look at, you know, everyone loves to hate Perfect Day. But you know, if you really think about it, it's not that they're stupid, right? Yeah, they had a lot of money, but also at the time there was no infrastructure, there is no supply chain. They had to prove out a lot of things that today you can just get partners to do. So I think like it's definitely kind of evolved a lot. So yeah, we slight plug. So actually tomorrow we've got a white paper launching, called yeah, basically trying to figure out, does lean startup approach that's kind of started in Silicon Valley, can that apply to food tech? And we actually particularly look into this area as well.
Yeah, I'd say it's important to look at the long view, as the others were pointing out. We've come a long way technologically, and I think there's a lot of room for optimism. Yeah, there's a lot of new products out on the market that there are now that there weren't many years ago. Some of them not so good, some of them very good. And there's room to grow. I think so much of what we're trying to do here, though, is rather than technological, it's more organizational and cultural. And there are still problems with the alt protein industry. I think a main one is a real over-reliance on venture funding, which means that we're really at the whims of like these shorter term timelines and on consumer perception, where there's been this essentially large attack on the industry with the growth of this messaging around ultra processed foods. And that has real impacts on us in terms of drying up funding. And it's been really amazing, though, to see institutions really stepping up. There's so many more university institutions like Johns Hopkins with these programs that can really form the technological basis for moving forward. And to point at another issue the industry has had is that it's been so fragmented with when what we need is a more centralized, collaborative approach to moving this industry forward. So yeah, pointing at the role of institutions is is really, as being really important here, I think is everyone should get some credit for that. But yes, I'm very hopeful. I think this is a multi-decade project. I think we will get there in the end if we're all committed to working on this, and we'll be able to weather a lot of these storms along the way. And these trends will come and go when it comes to VC funding, and ideally we get there in less time rather than more. But yeah, I am optimistic.
Okay, I think I'm gonna move up to audience questions. I'm gonna give precedence to the people that are already in the room in person, but if not, I'll read out what we have online. Anyone wanna come up? Roma? We have an audience member who wants to ask a question. I'll just pass the microphone to her.
Hi, my name is Roma, and I had a question about, you mentioned, I think, robotic automation for collecting a lot of your morphological testing data. So I wanted to know if you could speak a little more about what specific technologies you use.
Sure, I think that one's for me. So we use fairly typical robots that are, was there some echo there? Yeah, we use off-the-shelf robots, but I've done a lot to design software systems that help them coordinate and communicate with each other. So typical things like incubators, we have one for growing cells, one for storing fridge temperature reagents, another that's room temperature just for our plasticware. These are incubators that have a little door at the back, and so there's an arm in the middle that can pick up a plate that's on a stack, and then it will present it out the door, and then a robotic arm can go and pick that up and then place it on our microscope. We use a plate reader, again, pretty standard, and from the images we take there, we can track cell growth over time because we take images very frequently, and then also kind of pull out some of those indications of cell viability and health through the morphology. And then we have liquid handling machines that prepare different media formulations or change media or passage cells. Again, the machines themselves pretty well established now. The challenge there being the specific protocols we have to develop for cells, and making sure that everything communicates with each other at the right time, because cell biology is very time dependent. If we pull out a plate to passage and then go and image some others for too long, then those cells might be affected.
Thank you. I guess my other part of the question was, are there specific technologies or companies that you have found have been effective? I know that I've heard of CellX Precision and other companies for liquid handling. Do you have any?
I don't think so. I wouldn't say we have a specific preference there. I think we use a Beckman Coulter Biomech on liquid handling. We also work with Analytic Jenna. We've done some work at OpenTrons, SPT LabTech for the Dragonfly, and we use the Mantis as well. Some different types of machines. Some are kind of liquid handling, aspiration and dispensing, and we use that for the cell manipulation. Others that are just dispensing, and we use that mostly for media preparation. So they have typically a much larger volume range that they can deal with. So you can have small growth factors or big buffers all connected to the same system, and are much quicker at dispensing than a kind of multi-purpose liquid handling robot.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm gonna read out one of the questions that we have online. I don't think we have that much time, but maybe this will be the last. One of them was on IP, intellectual property. I think we already touched on that, so I'm gonna read out the other one. And it's, do you see any role for a nutritionist, PhD training, public health background, with some coding and biostatistical model experience that can contribute in the alternative protein field? It says that the person says that they feel like alternative protein seems to need more food tech, cell culture, wet lab people, or modeling people, data scientists, but not nutritionists. So I guess they are just asking if their background would be relevant to any of this type of work.
I can speak for Multus. So actually, our analytical chemist has a nutrition background, so he does a lot of work developing functionality assays for different ingredients and understanding how they interact with each other and affect cell behavior. We're also very interested about the effect of media composition on nutritional properties of cells. So can we actually tune the sensory properties and nutritional properties of the products that are being developed by altering the media? And what that requires, again, is data in our case. And so we need to understand what are the right types of data to collect and when to collect them so that we can optimize with that. And so that's where I think your background could come into play at Multus. We don't develop cultivated meat products as end products. We just develop the media formulation. So for sure, in companies developing end products, I could see someone trained in nutrition with the computational skills to predict, model, and optimize being very valuable.
I think there's a lot of room for nutritionists here. I think we see, unfortunately, the field of nutrition being highly polarized, and in some cases weaponized. And I think it's really important that we have good nutrition in this field, so that we can know if we are doing things that are detrimental and catch it early, because, you know, if we do slip-ups in this field and put things out there that aren't good, that's going to really impact us, especially in terms of funding that comes into the space. And then secondly, we need to put good nutrition science out there when what the work we are doing is good. We know there are so many advantages to plant-based approaches to diets. We know there is a lot of misinformation being spread, and so having that solid backbone to counter false narratives, but also, you know, find out what's going on. I think we have a lot of space for more nutritionists to work in this field. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I would agree with what Itsi and Cai said as well. You know, we don't do anything to do with nutrition, but we see that a lot of our clients do look a lot into nutrition, especially because at the moment, really what people are focusing on more is high value ingredients, and a lot of times that's because of nutritional value. But also if you look at I think I guess a few years ago, I think a lot of the applications that people look at are kind of like lower value, high bulk kind of products, whereas now if you look, and a lot of that was around sustainability, things like that, whereas if you look at the landscape today, there's a lot more focus on the nutritional value, but also food security solutions of alt protein. So I think like particularly in nutrition there, I think no doubt is something that's really needed. I think it's just really finding the right organization. So like looking at, you know, if you go to a Pepsi, that's not really what their goal is, right? Like not every kind of like corporate is the same. So, and the same with like company, like startups as well. It's not just corporate, it's like every area. So look at actually, you know, which people in the alt protein area are working on what things, and therefore, you know, who do you want to work for?
All right, thank you so much. I just wanna conclude this panel by sharing a link to our Alt Protein website too. Everyone can check out the recording after. So if anyone wants to revisit this later or share it with everyone else. I just also want to thank all our panelists. I know we're joining from like all different parts of the world. Like Itsi, I know it's super early in California, so thank you. I know it's midday in the UK. And it just was very exciting to be able to put together a panel on this. I feel like this is still a very niche area for a lot of people. And we hope this knowledge has helped inform some other people, and maybe someone else will be interested in either, you know, starting to approach their alternative protein work in a more computational manner, or just be inspired to do more work in this area. So I just want to thank you all again. Thank you to all our attendees, and thank you to the Good Food Institute for helping us host this.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Please feel free to get in touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, anyone feel free to get in contact. Always, I think all of us are going to be very keen to chat about this more with anyone who is interested.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.